No one expected the first Karate Kid movie to be the sleeper hit of 1984, but it happened. And within 10 days of its release, plans for a sequel went into immediate effect. The first film made Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita some of the most recognizable stars of the 80s decade. But would the sequel live up to its predecessor? Or would it go downhill from there? How do you turn a little movie about an old karate master who mentors a bullied high schooler into an epic franchise on the same level as Back to the Future? You make sequels, you make video games, you make toys, and eventually you make an outlandish cartoon. And you do it as fast as you can. So sit back, relax, chop through 6 blocks of ice to make a Pat Margarita, and let's look back at The Karate Kid Part 2, The Rise of a Franchise. When we last left Daniel LaRusso and Mr. Miyagi, Daniel had just crane kicked his way to victory against Johnny Lawrence and the Cobra Kais. It was a moment of pure ecstasy as his mother and girlfriend rushed to the mat along with a huge crowd of adoring audience members. Even Johnny Lawrence had the good sense to hand his opponent the trophy. Part 2 starts literally moments after the first film. After hitting the showers, Daniel and Miyagi are on their way to meet Ali and Mrs. LaRusso, when they see an altercation going on with Sensei Kreese and the boys. Kreese is taking out his frustrations on Johnny and is about to make him pass out when Miyagi intervenes. Finally, it's time for a showdown between Miyagi-Do and Cobra Kai senseis. Kreese bloodies his knuckles as he tries to get the best of Miyagi, but Miyagi is too cunning. He cocks his hand back ready to send Kreese straight to Cobra Hell. And then, honk! Mercy is for the strong. As he and Daniel walk away, Daniel says, "You could have killed him, couldn't you?" "Aye." "Well, why didn't you then?" "Why didn't you then?" Because he's not a murdering psychopath. I thought we established this in the first movie. Did Daniel seriously wonder why Miyagi didn't kill a guy in a parking lot in front of a bunch of teenagers? Yes, he did. There was a rumor going around that this opening sequence was shot during the production of The Karate Kid Part 1, which isn't true. It was written in the original script for Part 1, but they decided not to film it. It was never going to beat the apex of the first film's euphoric ending, so they decided it would be a perfect way to open the sequel, and it was. It was also fun to see the senseis briefly duke it out. Months later, Daniel arrives at Miyagi's house with a busted-up fender. He blames Ali and accuses her of leaving him for some football player from UCLA. We only find out what really happened 30 years later in Cobra Kai. Unfortunately, back in 1986, when Karate Kid 2 came out, we had to settle for Daniel's side of the story. Elizabeth Shue didn't return because she was attending Harvard University at the time and was unavailable. It was a shame because she was such a big part of the first film and her absence is noticeable. Mr. Miyagi gets a letter from Okinawa informing him that his father is deathly ill and that he should come there as soon as possible. Daniel decides to take some money from his college savings and accompany his friend on his travels. And so begins a journey that explores the backstory of Mr. Miyagi. For a moment, let's go back to March 25th, 1985, where Pat Morita was in attendance at the 57th Academy Awards ceremony. It was an apex moment for the 53-year-old actor as he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. Mr. Miyagi, the role he was nominated for, had some eerie similarities with his real life. In the film, Miyagi's wife and unborn son died at an internment camp during World War II. In real life, Pat Morita and his family were also living in an internment camp during World War II. Before that, Morita had been diagnosed with spinal tuberculosis when he was 2 years old and spent most of the next 9 years at the Weimar Institute in Weimar, California, and later at the Shriners Hospital in San Francisco. He was covered in a full-body cast for lengthy periods of time, and he was told he would never walk again. After significant spinal surgery, he was released from the hospital at the age of 11, where he was directly transferred to the internment camp with his family. So he had a deep connection with the events of his most famous character, to say the least. He had been working his butt off since the early 70s, acting in commercials, doing stand-up comedy, and making memorable TV appearances. And while he had found a certain amount of fame as Arnold on Happy Days, nothing compared to his breakout role as Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid. It was on the same level as Doc Brown from Back to the Future, another film series about a mentor-mentee duo that go on adventures. Pat Morita had made his mark. and he was about to see if he would be taking home a golden statue. The Academy had asked Ralph Macchio to be a presenter that night alongside Morita. Macchio declined. At the time, he had been struggling with his newfound fame, and he also felt like he was getting pigeonholed by his role as Daniel LaRusso. Here's a quote by Ralph from his book Waxing On: The Karate Kid in Me. "Somehow I brushed it off. The weight and significance were lost on me in my ignorant youth. I was too focused on distancing myself and whatever else I prioritized at that age. I was buried in my daily home life and made a hasty decision. I let it go. I moved on. Until it was Oscar night." It was something that Macchio would regret for over a decade. He sat at home with his family that night as he watched the Oscar ceremony on TV. He knew he had messed up when Pat showed up on the screen and they started playing clips from The Karate Kid. Morita didn't win that night. It didn't matter though. He had been acknowledged as a true talent in the industry, a rare thing for Asian actors at the time. Cut to Oahu, Hawaii. Morita was at the top of his game, filming a sequel to what was now officially a franchise. This time, we would find out about Mr. Miyagi's lost love, a best friend turned mortal enemy, and the effect of his past on the present. Daniel's role was that of a support system this time around. His story had been mostly told in the first film. We wouldn't get a satisfying development of his character until Cobra Kai. As before with the original Karate Kid film, Pat would relate deeply to a major story element of this film, the death of his father. Morita had based many of the mannerisms of Mr. Miyagi on his father and his father's friends. Sadly, Pat's father, Tamaru, died in Sacramento, California in 1956 after a hit-and-run accident one night after he had been walking home from watching a movie. The driver hit and dragged Tamaru's body for a long time without even knowing what had happened. It was a tragic and senseless death. It devastated Pat and his entire family. It was something, along with his traumatic childhood, that would trigger a never-ending bout with alcoholism for the rest of his life. The stakes are higher in The Karate Kid Part 2. The villains are a bit more maniacal this time around. Chozen is sort of a psychopath who loves tormenting our dynamic duo right from the start. He's basically acting at the behest of his uncle, the stoic and begrudging Sato. Sato wants to battle Miyagi to the death over his honor being stolen. This was due to Miyagi falling in love with Sato's soon-to-be wife, Yuki. She and Sato were set up in an arranged marriage, and once Sato found out about Miyagi's feelings, he challenged him to a fight to the death. Miyagi instead fled the country, being branded a coward by Sato ever since. Daniel's training is also riskier this time around. Gone are the days of balancing on a boat at the lake. Daniel learns something called the drum technique, but one wrong move here, and Miyagi is not essing around. We also meet Kamiko, an aspiring dancer who Daniel falls in love with. She also returns in Cobra Kai Season 3. I have to tell you, if it weren't for that show, these films would be good, but not quite great. I know that sounds blasphemous, but the show adds so much depth and context to the films that I can't imagine a world where it doesn't exist now. Even Chozen, the over-the-top villain of this movie, gets a redemption arc in Cobra Kai. It's awesome. Anyway, after multiple run-ins with Chozen and his Okinawan thugs, a typhoon hits the town and Miyagi saves Sato's life. Daniel then helps a little girl that is trapped on a pole. When Sato orders Chozen to help Daniel, he cowers away. Then, for the final fight of the film, Chozen drops in on a town celebration and he and Daniel duke it out. The crane kick doesn't work this time, so Daniel uses the drum technique, which, you ever hear of sweeping the leg, Chozen? Credits roll. I feel like this movie was a lot slower than the original film. I like it a lot, but it's the one I revisit the least. I like learning about Mr. Miyagi's backstory, but it would have been cool if we got to see him and Sato actually fight. That was ripped away from us, even though it was a big part of the buildup of this movie. After the typhoon happens, Sato is literally a different guy. No more growly voice. He's just a teddy bear now. I think we could learn a lot about Miyagi by how he fights against someone who is formidable and trained similarly to him. It felt like a missed opportunity. This movie made even more money than the first film, grossing $115 million against the original's $90 million. A toy line was released to the public in 1986 by the company Remco. They produced action figures for Daniel, Miyagi, Kreese, Sato, Chozen, and Johnny Lawrence. They came in playsets based on the attack alley and training center of Karate Kid Part 2. In addition, it had Sato's cannery, where the super dangerous hook training took place. They also had a corner challenge and breakaway challenge playset, as well as a set for the competition center from the first film. I want these, all of them. Video game publishing company Microdeal released the Karate Kid Part 2, the computer game, an Atari ST, and an Amiga video game adaptation in 1987. In the game, you assume the role of Daniel as you fight various opponents. There are 2 bonus stages featuring digitally recreated scenes from the film, Daniel shattering the ice blocks and Miyagi using chopsticks to capture flies. Several features of the Karate Kid video game for the NES, released in 1987, are derived from the Karate Kid Part 2. The first stage is the tournament scene from the first film, but then stages 2 through 4 and its 2 bonus games, in which the player must shatter up to 6 ice blocks, are based on the Karate Kid Part 2. There's also a stage where you must avoid a swinging hook as many times as possible using the drum technique depicted in the film. Seeing as this film made more than the original, another sequel was guaranteed in the form of The Karate Kid Part 3. We'll get into that in another video. How did this movie impact Pat Morita's career? Well, it kept him working steadily all the way into the late 90s. In his career, he had been the star of his own TV series twice. The first time was after he had found fame as Arnold on Happy Days, which he left to do a show called Mr. T and Tina in 1976. It was about Taro, a single father who relocates from Japan to Chicago. He's raising 2 children and hires what he thinks is a traditional nanny to help him out. Instead, he gets the Nebraska-born Tina, who challenges his conservative ways. It was canceled after a month. It was, however, the first Asian American sitcom on network television. After Karate Kid 2, Morita would star in his second television series called O'Hara. It was about a knowledgeable senior Asian American police officer named O'Hara who investigates crimes with his younger, amiable, but culturally insensitive partner, Lieutenant George Shaver. It ran for 2 seasons, but never really caught on. Morita was always heralded for his performances as Miyagi, but was never appreciated for his other roles. That's a shame. A shame that would, along with his difficult past, cause him to self-medicate with alcohol and humor. He was a high-functioning alcoholic. I was surprised to find that out. In all his interviews, he always seemed focused and very articulate. On many days, he would put vodka in his coffee to get him going, which means most of the time he was on camera, he had alcohol in his system. He knew he had a problem. He also knew he would never get control of it, something he admitted to his third and final wife, Evelyn Guerrero. I think if he had lived to see the Cobra Kai series, he would have been proud of the legacy he left behind. His partnership with Ralph Macchio was something that has lasted into our present day. Even though Macchio regretted not being there for his co-star during the 1985 Oscars, another chance to do so would arise over a decade later. In 2004, the producer of the Asian Excellence Awards was holding a formal concert event at the Lincoln Center in New York City. They called to see if Macchio would be interested in presenting the Lifetime Achievement Award to Pat Morita. In fact, Pat had personally requested that Ralph be there to present the award to him. Without giving it a second thought, Macchio accepted and was there for his friend the night of the award. In Macchio's book, he recounts the moment like this. The moment in which I introduced him was one I will never forget. He appeared at the opposite end of the stage in his tuxedo and took the long walk across to me at the podium. The formally dressed crowd sprung to their feet with a roar that seemed to last for 5 minutes. Pat and I hugged, and he said thank you with his signature, "I love ya ass, baby." We stood together and took in the echoing applause. Camera flashes strobed throughout the theater, from the first row of the orchestra to the farthest reaches of the balcony. The moment played, suspended in time. It was a gift to everyone in the theater, none more than myself. Macchio and his legendary co-star got to share this wonderful moment together, and that feels good. 1 year later, Pat Morita passed away due to kidney failure from years of alcohol abuse. I hope he knew what a legacy he left behind. He gave hope and happiness to generations far exceeding the one he debuted in. That's no small feat. He is, and always will be, our sensei. Hey, I'm Scotty Dunn. Thanks for watching. If you haven't seen it already, check out my other video on the first Karate Kid, along with these videos. See you next time.